There was a man who benched 500 pounds in 1953. No bench shirt, no spotters with handoffs, just a flat bench in a bar loaded with plates that shouldn't have been possible. His name was Doug Hepburn. And if you've never heard of him, that's exactly the problem. Doug Hepburn's strength was so far beyond his era that other lifters thought he was cheating. They couldn't understand how a quiet Canadian with a modest build could press weights overhead that made world champions look weak. You'll finally understand how a quiet Canadian lifter built strength that experts still call unfair. But the most shocking part of Hepburn's story isn't the strength itself. It's why history refused to give him full credit. This is the story of the strongest man nobody remembers. Doug Hepburn didn't start as a natural athlete. He started as a kid nobody wanted on their team, born in Vancouver with physical challenges that made normal childhood impossible. He grew up feeling like his body had betrayed him before he even understood what strength was. One leg was shorter than the other. His vision struggled with serious cross-eye issues. Other boys chose him last for every game. He wasn't just weak, he felt invisible. And in the schoolyards of 1930s Vancouver, that kind of invisibility carved deep wounds. But somewhere in that pain, a quiet fire started burning. He didn't want to be the strongest kid in school. He just wanted to stop being the weakest. The iron found him in his teens. A local gym with rusty barbells and concrete floors. The kind of place where working men trained after long shifts and nobody cared what you looked like, just what you could lift. Doug picked up a barbell for the first time and felt something shift inside his chest. This was language he could speak. Within months, he was pressing weights that confused the older lifters. Within a year, he was squatting numbers that made people stop and watch. His body had been built wrong for running and jumping, but it had been built perfectly for moving heavy iron. The same thick torso and dense shoulders that made him look awkward in street clothes made him a machine under a loaded bar. The gym became his sanctuary. While other teenagers chased girls and attended dances, Doug chased plates, 5 pounds at a time. He'd arrive early in the morning when the gym was empty. The smell of chalk dust and cold steel, the echo of iron plates settling onto concrete. These became the sounds of home. His training partners noticed something unusual. Doug never complained about the weight, never made excuses, never blamed his equipment or his genetics. He just showed up, lifted, and came back the next day stronger. That consistency separated him from everyone else who walked through those gym doors. By his early 20s, Doug Hepburn was no longer the weak kid. He was a guy other lifters whispered about, the guy who kept adding plates when everyone else had racked their weights and gone home. The golden age of strength was just beginning, and Doug was about to prove he belonged at the very top. The 1950s were the era of Olympic weightlifting. 3 lifts decided who was strongest: the press, the snatch, the clean and jerk. Doug Hepburn specialized in the press. Strict overhead lifting with no leg drive allowed. Just pure shoulder and tricep power forcing hundreds of pounds from chest to lockout. He pressed 370 pounds overhead in competition. In an era when most elite lifters topped out around 300, he made the press look easy when it was supposed to be brutal. Other lifters couldn't explain it. His arms weren't longer. His technique wasn't revolutionary. He was just unfairly strong. In 1953, Doug Hepburn became world weightlifting champion. He walked into an international meet as a Canadian underdog. He walked out as the best heavyweight lifter on the planet. He beat lifters from the Soviet Union. He beat lifters from Europe who had trained their entire lives for this moment. And he did it with a quiet confidence that never needed a microphone. The Europeans couldn't believe what they were watching. They'd studied film of American lifters. They'd analyzed Soviet training methods. But nobody had prepared them for Doug Hepburn. He lifted with a calm that seemed almost casual. No psyching up, no screaming. Just a thick Canadian who made impossible weights move like they weighed nothing. But his overhead pressing was only part of the story, because Doug Hepburn was doing things with other lifts that wouldn't become official sports for another decade. He was bench pressing over 500 pounds when bench pressing wasn't even in the Olympics. He was squatting over 600 pounds deep when most gyms didn't have proper squat racks. He was deadlifting over 700 pounds with a straight bar and no straps. These numbers don't sound impossible today, but in 1953, they were science fiction. Modern powerlifters train with specialized bars, knee wraps, and bench shirts. Doug Hepburn trained with whatever his local gym could scrounge together. He lifted in a world where a 400-pound bench press made you a legend, and he casually moved 500. Think about what that means. The equipment that modern lifters consider basic didn't exist. No power racks with safety pins. No specialty barbells with perfect knurling. No calibrated plates that weighed exactly what they claimed. Doug was using bent bars and mismatched weights in gyms that barely had heat, and he was setting records that still impress experts 70 years later. Other lifters started using a specific word to describe him. Unfair. It wasn't a compliment. It was an accusation wrapped in awe. Doug Hepburn's pound-for-pound strength made other champions feel like they were playing a different game. His natural leverage and explosive power looked unbelievable even to people who lifted for a living. Some said his thick barrel chest gave him an advantage on the press. Others claimed his dense legs made squatting easier, but nobody could explain the bench press. Nobody could explain how he moved maximum weights with technique that looked almost relaxed. The truth was simpler and more frustrating. Doug Hepburn was just built to be strong. But here's where the story gets complicated, because strength alone doesn't make you famous. And Doug Hepburn was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The 1950s loved strongmen who smiled for cameras, big personalities who could sell tickets and shake hands and tell stories. Doug Hepburn wasn't wired that way. He was soft-spoken, thoughtful, the kind of man who preferred the gym to the spotlight. When promoters asked him to put on a show, he gave them numbers instead of theater. That quiet nature cost him, because while Doug was setting world records in Vancouver, other lifters with smaller numbers were getting magazine covers and sponsorship deals. The strength world was starting to reward charisma as much as iron, and Doug kept choosing the iron. He did some strongman exhibitions, bending steel, breaking chains, the usual circus acts that paid the bills. But his heart was never in it. He wanted to be known for lifting, not performing. Unfortunately, the world wanted both, and Doug was only willing to give one. American lifters with better publicity machines started getting more attention. Soviet lifters had state propaganda, turning them into heroes. Doug Hepburn had Vancouver newspapers that occasionally mentioned his name. The geographic isolation hurt him more than anyone realized at the time. Canadian athletes rarely got the international spotlight unless they played hockey. His training method was brutally simple. No gimmicks, no trends, just a system built on heavy singles and patient progression. He'd pick a weight near his maximum, do 1 rep, rest, do another single, rest again. He'd repeat this pattern until he could handle 8 or 10 solid singles with that weight. Then he'd add 5 pounds and start the process over. It took months to add significant weight to the bar, but the strength he built was permanent. Other lifters chased quick gains and burned out. Doug Hepburn built strength that refused to leave. He also added back offsets after his heavy singles, dropped the weight by 10 or 15%, do several sets of 3 to 5 reps, build muscle and work capacity while the nervous system recovered. This approach would later become famous under other names: West Side style max effort work, Russian strength programs, modern powerlifting templates. But in the 1950s, it was just Doug Hepburn's way of making his body do impossible things. He trained the big lifts 3 times per week: squat, press, bench, deadlift, nothing fancy. Everything heavy. He believed raw strength created muscle naturally, and his body proved him right. The method worked because it was honest. No shortcuts, no magic exercises, just progressive overload applied with religious patience. Doug would spend 8 weeks adding 30 pounds to his bench press. Other lifters would try to add 30 pounds in 2 weeks and wonder why they got injured. That difference in approach explained everything. His physique was thick and powerful, but not sculpted for bodybuilding magazines. He looked like a dock worker who could bend steel, not a model who posed in trunks. And in an era when bodybuilding was starting to dominate fitness magazines, that cost him even more spotlight. The world wanted athletes who looked good in photographs. Doug Hepburn just wanted to be strong. So while his bench press numbers climbed past 500 pounds, the cameras turned toward men with smaller lifts and prettier physiques. The irony burned quietly in the background of his career. Bodybuilders were learning to manipulate lighting and angles, learning to dehydrate themselves for photo shoots, learning to sell the illusion of strength rather than strength itself. Doug refused to play that game. His muscles were built for function, not appearance. And in the 1950s, that decision cost him dearly. But there's something else you need to know about Doug Hepburn, something that makes his strength even more remarkable and his story even sadder, because while his numbers kept climbing, his life was falling apart. Doug wrestled with difficult personal circumstances that most people never saw. He faced challenges that made public life extremely hard. Alcohol became a serious problem, mental health battles that he fought alone in an era when nobody talked about that kind of pain. These complications dimmed the spotlight he deserved. The drinking started gradually, a beer after training, then a few beers, then something stronger to quiet the voices that told him he wasn't good enough, even when he was literally the best in the world, even when he'd just set another record. The demons didn't care about his accomplishment. Here's the twist that history forgot. Doug Hepburn's best lifts often happened during the darkest periods of his life, when his personal world was chaos. He'd disappear into the gym and move weights that defied explanation. The bar didn't judge him. The iron didn't care about his struggles. So he kept lifting, and the numbers kept growing. But those lifts happened off camera, in training sessions with no witnesses except a handful of local lifters who knew better than to ask questions. So the world never got to see Doug Hepburn at his absolute peak. They saw the competition lifts, the official records, but they missed the private wars he won in cold gyms at midnight. Stories filtered through the Vancouver strength community. Doug benching 520 for a solid single on a Tuesday morning with no fanfare. Doug squatting 650 so deep his hamstrings touched his calves. Doug pressing 390 overhead in a grimy basement gym. None of it documented. None of it recorded, just whispers and legends. That's why calling him underrated isn't strong enough. Doug Hepburn was erased. His strength was too big for the marketing machine of his era. His personality was too quiet for the spotlight. His struggles were too real for the heroic narratives people wanted. So history moved on, and Doug Hepburn became a ghost. What happened next is the part almost no one talks about. By the late 1950s, Olympic weightlifting was changing. The press was becoming controversial. Judges couldn't agree on what counted as strict. Lifters were finding ways to turn the press into a layback that used momentum instead of pure strength. By 1972, the Olympic press would be removed entirely, and Doug Hepburn's signature lift would disappear from the world stage. The decision devastated him. The press was a movement where his unfair strength showed most clearly, where his thick torso and powerful shoulders created leverage that nobody else possessed. Removing it from Olympic competition felt like the sport was removing him personally. Meanwhile, a new sport was forming. Powerlifting, 3 lifts, squat, bench, deadlift. The exact movements where Doug had set unofficial records years earlier. Local meets started happening across North America. Informal competitions where guys tested their maximum single reps. No Olympic complexity, just pure maximum strength. But by the time powerlifting became official, Doug was past his prime. His body had absorbed decades of maximum effort training. His personal struggles had carved away years he could have dominated. The sport that should have made him a legend arrived too late. He would have been perfect for powerlifting. The sport rewarded exactly what he built his entire career on: raw pressing power, brutal squat strength, deadlift numbers that made spectators uncomfortable. But the timing was wrong. And in strength sports, timing is everything. He shifted toward coaching and teaching, sharing his methods with younger lifters who wanted to understand how he'd built such unfair strength. He explained his system patiently. Heavy singles, slow progression. Trust the process. Some listened, most didn't, because by the 1970s, the fitness world wanted quick results and fancy programs. Doug Hepburn's brutal simplicity felt old-fashioned. The young lifters wanted Bulgarian split routines. They wanted German volume training. They wanted anything that promised fast gains and looked scientific on paper. Doug offered them something better, a system that actually worked, but it required patience they didn't have, and discipline they couldn't sustain. He'd watch them ignore his advice, watch them chase programs that promised 30-pound bench increases in 6 weeks, watch them get injured or burn out or quit entirely. And he'd shake his head, because he'd given them the blueprint. They just couldn't see it. Magazine articles started forgetting his name. New champions rose with modern training and better marketing. Doug watched from the shadows as lifters with smaller numbers became household names. It hurt in ways that heavyweights never could, because the bar had always been honest with him, but the world had not. Arnold Schwarzenegger became a household name with a 400-pound bench press. Doug Hepburn had benched 500 20 years earlier and remained unknown. That disparity told you everything about the difference between strength and fame. He lived quietly in Vancouver, training when his body allowed, drinking when the pain got too loud, writing down his thoughts about strength for anyone who cared to read. The powerlifting community knew who he was. Old school lifters still whispered his name with reverence, but the mainstream had moved on. There were moments of recognition, small honors, local appreciation, a few articles in specialist magazines that understood what he'd achieved, but nothing close to what his achievements deserved. No Hollywood contracts, no major sponsorships, no statues or halls of fame. Just a quiet Canadian who'd once been the strongest man in the world, living in the same city where he'd started lifting as a weak kid who refused to stay weak. The saddest part was watching younger lifters discover training methods that Doug had invented decades earlier. They'd talk about max effort days and dynamic days like someone had just discovered fire. Doug had been doing that in 1950, but nobody remembered. Nobody connected the dots. Doug Hepburn died in 2000. The internet was just beginning to make old strength stories accessible. But he passed before YouTube could show modern lifters what he'd done, before social media could turn his training logs into viral content, before a new generation of strength athletes could discover him and bring his name back to life. For years, he remained forgotten, a footnote in weightlifting history books, a name that serious powerlifters recognized but couldn't fully explain to outsiders. The most underrated strength legend in history, and nobody seemed to care. But here's what makes Doug Hepburn's story matter now, because his numbers are finally being understood. Modern strength coaches have gone back through old records. They've compared his lifts to contemporary athletes, and they've realized something shocking. Doug Hepburn's raw strength still ranks among the greatest ever recorded. His bench press of 500-plus pounds in 1953 equals modern elite raw benching. When you account for equipment advances, his overhead pressing strength has never been matched in strict Olympic-style form. His squat and deadlift numbers from the 1950s would qualify him for national championships today. 70 years later, with all our modern knowledge, he'd still be elite. Strength historians have done the math. They've adjusted for bodyweight classes and equipment differences. They've compared Doug's lifts to world records from every era, and the conclusion is undeniable. Doug Hepburn was one of the strongest humans who ever lived. Pound for pound, era for era, natural strength for natural strength. His training method predicted every major strength program that came after. Westside Barbell's max effort days are structured exactly like Hepburn's heavy singles. Russian periodization programs use his back-off volume concept. Modern powerlifting templates are built on the same principles he used in Vancouver gyms. He invented the blueprint. Other people got famous for following it. Louis Simmons at Westside Barbell would later become legendary for max effort training. But Doug Hepburn had been doing it 20 years earlier. Soviet sports scientists would write papers about the importance of heavy singles. Doug had been living it since the 1940s. The entire strength world eventually arrived at conclusions Doug had reached through pure trial and error. And his story proves something the modern fitness world desperately needs to remember. Strength isn't loud. It doesn't need validation or applause. It doesn't require perfect circumstances or ideal genetics. Doug Hepburn started as a physically limited kid who felt invisible. He became the strongest man on earth through patient, brutal consistency. And he did it all while fighting battles that would have broken most people. That's why he's the most underrated legend ever. Not just because history forgot him, but because his entire life was proof that real strength comes from places nobody expects. From quiet gyms, from broken bodies that refuse to quit, from men who choose the iron over the spotlight every single time. The world gave Doug Hepburn physical challenges and personal demons. He gave the world strength records that still inspire awe. The world gave him obscurity and poverty. He gave the world a training system that works as well today as it did 70 years ago. The world gave him every reason to quit. He gave the world proof that some men are simply built different. Doug Hepburn's unfair strength came from fair places. Years of patient work. Thousands of heavy singles. Decades of showing up when nobody was watching. He never got the fame he earned, but he got something more permanent. He got to be right. About training, about strength, about what the human body can do when you refuse to accept limits. Every single principle that modern strength coaches teach can be traced back to lifters like Doug Hepburn: progressive overload, specificity, heavy singles for neural adaptation, back-off volume for hypertrophy, rest and recovery. He understood all of it before sports science gave it fancy names. Today, his name is slowly coming back. Powerlifters discovering old articles, strength historians piecing together his story, YouTubers making videos about forgotten legends. The internet is finally doing what 1950s media couldn't, giving Doug Hepburn the recognition he deserved while he was alive. But it's bittersweet, because he's not here to see it. He died before the world could apologize for forgetting him, before modern athletes could thank him for showing the way, before history could correct its biggest mistake. All we can do now is tell his story, and make sure the next generation knows the name Doug Hepburn means something. He was the first man to bench 500 pounds, the 1953 world weightlifting champion, the creator of a training system that still builds champions, a man whose pound-for-pound strength made professionals question physics. And most importantly, he was proof that being truly great at something doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes greatness is quiet. Sometimes it happens in cold gyms with rusty barbells and concrete floors. Sometimes it's witnessed by nobody except the iron itself. And sometimes the strongest man in the world is also the loneliest. That was Doug Hepburn, the Canadian strongman legend history tried to forget, the natural strength pioneer who invented modern powerlifting before powerlifting existed, the underrated champion who never got his parade. His legacy lives in every garage gym where someone trains alone, in every lifter who chooses long-term progress over short-term gains, in every athlete who trusts the process when everyone else chases shortcuts. Doug Hepburn showed us that real strength builds itself through consistency that most people will never understand. Doug Hepburn proved that real strength isn't loud. It simply refuses to be ignored. His numbers ignored time itself. His methods ignored trends and fashion. His legacy ignored the spotlight and built itself in the minds of serious lifters who knew real power when they saw it. He may have died in obscurity, but his strength is eternal. The next time you load a barbell for heavy singles, you're speaking Doug Hepburn's language. The next time you trust slow progression over quick fixes, you're following his path. The next time you choose the work over the glory, you're honoring his memory. Because that's what legends do. They show you the way, even when the world refuses to watch. Doug Hepburn was unfairly strong in all the right ways, and history's failure to celebrate him properly is one of strength sport's greatest injustices. But his story lives on in every lifter who believes that patient, brutal consistency beats talent and genetics, in every athlete who trains when nobody's watching, in every champion who values the lift more than the applause. That's his real legacy, not the records, not the titles, but the proof that true strength builds itself in the dark. And eventually, if you're patient enough, the world catches up, even if it takes 70 years, even if it comes too late. The truth always finds a light. His training logs still circulate in powerlifting forums. His methods still get debated by coaches who never met him. His name still appears in conversations about the strongest humans who ever lived. Doug Hepburn lives on through the iron itself, through every heavy single that builds neural strength, through every patient progression that adds 5 pounds when everyone else wants to add 50. The weak kid from Vancouver who became the strongest man on earth, the world champion who history forgot, the underrated legend who proved that real strength doesn't need permission or applause. That was Doug Hepburn, and his story deserves to be remembered